So get this. King Charles thought he was just walking into a super boring routine briefing. You know, standard royal paperwork. But instead, Queen Camilla drops this absolute bombshell on his desk. She slaps down a formal request, and Charles is just sitting there, completely frozen, staring at her like, "Are you kidding me?" And look, she wasn't asking for another fancy palace, a title bump, or some shiny new crown jewels. She wanted full control over Princess Diana's forbidden personal archive. We're talking about a locked, away vault full of Diana's private letters, tapes, secret diaries, and personal family stuff. Things Camilla hadn't been able to get her hands on for decades. And Camilla's basically saying, "I want those locks removed right now." Charles didn't say a word at first. He'd walked into his private study expecting a quick 10-minute check on household schedules with Camilla and a couple of senior aides. But that folder on his desk completely flipped the script. See, this archive was totally kept off the books from normal royal records. It had Diana's handwritten journals, raw letters, personal tapes, photos, stuff kept locked away, after she passed precisely because it was her private life, not meant for the official palace machinery. Now Camilla stays ice, cold, totally composed, as she lays it all out. She tells the king he needs to hand over the keys to her, strip away the security clearance, and let her decide who gets to look inside. Her reasoning: anything that could mess with the royal family's reputation should be controlled by the reigning queen. She picked her words super carefully, but make no mistake, it sounded a lot like a threat. Charles takes off his glasses and looks straight at his wife. For a second, he thought he must have misheard her. Then he asks her point blank, "Why on earth would you ever need Diana's personal stuff?" Camilla's response: "The past can still mess with the throne, the family, and what the public thinks." But the calmer she played it, the more Charles started freaking out inside. And then, one tiny detail turns his bad feeling into full-blown suspicion. Camilla suddenly drops the exact internal classification code for the archive. That's a top-secret code that's only written on the sealed master inventory list. There is zero reason she should have known that number right. Then, one aide looks down at the floor, and the other one goes stiff as a board. Charles slams the folder shut without signing anything. He tells both aides to get out, and those heavy wooden doors shut behind them with a loud click. Whatever confusion was on Charles's face completely vanished. It was pure alarm now. This was way beyond asking for a peek at some documents. Someone inside the palace had leaked top, secret info from a system built specifically to keep Diana's private words safe. Camilla opened her mouth to try and explain, but Charles cut her off with one brutal question: "Who told you what was inside?" And man, that one question wasn't just about Camilla wanting power. It opened up a giant can of worms, touching on Diana's memory and reopening the deepest, rawest wounds for Charles, Prince William, and the entire royal family. To really get why Camilla's demand completely shook the king to his core, you gotta understand what this archive actually was. This wasn't just a pile of dusty old historical papers. For Charles, it was like a vault holding all the guilt he could never quite run away from. For Prince William, it was his mom's raw, unfiltered voice. A mother taken way too soon. And for Camilla, it was this locked time capsule that constantly defined how the public saw her, questioning if she even belonged on the throne. So, left all alone in his study after that blowout, Charles was basically stuck between a rock and a hard place. He had 3 different roles pulling him apart. He was the king, sworn to protect the monarchy. He was a husband, supposed to back his wife. And he was Diana's ex, still carrying the baggage and fallout of all her pain. Because look, this collection wasn't some normal palace property. It was a private emotional inheritance. Diana specifically meant for this stuff to go to her boys, not to be bossed around by palace bureaucrats. Rattled by the whole fight, Charles pulls open a top-secret inventory summary, and right there, he spots an entry for letters written during the final, messiest years of his marriage to Diana. Now, an inventory summary is basically a high-security cheat sheet. It tells you what's in the boxes without giving away the exact words. Charles freezes. His hands are literally gripping the page, but he just can't bring himself to flip it over, because deep down, he knows whatever Diana wrote back then was a raw, painful truth. Something no fancy royal title or PR team could ever spin or clean up. Meanwhile, Camilla retreats back to her private rooms, furious and embarrassed, but trying like hell not to show it. In a quiet moment with a trusted aide, she just unloads. She admits she is completely burnt out from living in the shadow of a woman who's been dead for almost 30 years. She felt like every single event, every royal ceremony, every bit of loyalty she showed was always being graded against Diana's ghost. But the aide could tell it wasn't just anger. Camilla was scared out of her mind. See, the archive had sealed files on Diana's rawest thoughts about royal marriage, how she worried about William and Harry's mental health, and her deep paranoia that palace insiders would one day rewrite her story to make the institution look good. That stuff was explosive because it completely shattered the official palace narrative. Plus, it was meant to protect her two sons, who'd grown up with cameras stuffed in their faces their whole lives. But what Camilla was really freaking out about was one specific audio tape. She believed Diana went all in on that recording, talking about Camilla's exact role in wrecking the marriage. Camilla was terrified this tape would leak to the public without giving her a chance to defend herself. So her trying to grab the archive, it wasn't just a power play. It was a desperate move to shut it down before the past could speak up again. A few minutes later, Prince William gets an urgent message from his dad. Kate watches his face turn completely white as he reads 4 words. Your mother's archive. Kate asks, what's going on? But William just sits there in dead silence for a few seconds, trying to wrap his head around it. Finally, he looks up and says, super seriously, Camilla would never make a crazy move like this unless she thought she was already inside. And boom, that thought takes him straight back to a private family thing months ago. The exact moment Camilla realized Diana had left behind stuff the palace could never touch. Because the truth is, this whole drama didn't start in Charles's study. It started months earlier at a quiet gathering in Kensington Palace. They were formally handing over some of Diana's personal things to William. It was supposed to be a nice, respectful moment. But then, somebody let something slip. Camilla happened to overhear that Diana had recorded a final tape. A tell all about her marriage, her boys, and the woman who'd one day take her spot as queen. William had shown up just expecting a quiet moment to honor his mom. Not the start of a massive royal feud. Charles was standing right there with Kate and Princess Anne, while the head archivist prepared the stuff for William to take home. The whole point was to pass Diana's things directly to William, so they'd stay safe with her family, instead of getting swallowed up by the palace system. Camilla actually walked in right at the very end. She wasn't even supposed to be in the room for the secret stuff. But she walked in right as the archivist leaned over and whispered to William in a low, heavy voice. The archivist explained that one specific cassette tape was locked down under Diana's own handwritten orders. It could only be opened if both William and Harry agreed, or on a future date Diana picked herself. The archivist called it Diana's personal story of the marriage. Camilla stopped dead in her tracks. Charles immediately tried to shut the conversation down, but it was too late. The cat was out of the bag. Camilla just stared at her husband, searching his face for answers he clearly didn't want to give. Look, Camilla wasn't even supposed to be anywhere near that room while they were talking about classified historical stuff. But she walked in right as the archivist was leaning over to William, talking in this hushed, super serious tone. This guy, the high-level archivist, whose whole job is guarding history, was explaining that one specific cassette tape was locked down tight by Diana's own handwritten orders. It could only be unsealed if both William and Harry gave the green light together, or on a specific future date Diana picked herself. He flat out called it Diana's definitive account of the marriage. Camilla froze dead in her tracks. Charles immediately tried to shut the conversation down, but the cat was already out of the bag. Camilla just stared daggers at her husband, searching his face for answers he clearly did not want to give. Later that night, after all the staff had cleared out, Camilla cornered Charles in a quiet palace hallway. She demanded to know if Diana had named her on that tape, but Charles wouldn't budge. He refused to confirm or deny a single thing, basically telling his wife, "Look, boundaries exist for a reason, and that testimony belongs to Diana and her boys, period." And to Camilla, his refusal was all the proof she needed that the tape contained absolute dynamite. A week later, she quietly went behind the scenes and asked a palace official for the master security protocols. You know, the playbook showing where everything was kept and who had access. The official respectfully told her no. But just a few days later, an unmarked envelope mysteriously popped up right in her private mail. She opened it up and found a leaked partial inventory list, and it wasn't just about one audio tape. It listed letters talking about Charles's decisions, Camilla's influence, and William's duty to protect his family from getting hurt all over again. It hit Camilla right then. Diana hadn't just left behind memories, she'd left behind explicit warnings. Then came the twist. Princess Anne happened to catch Camilla holding that exact paper during a formal reception. When their eyes locked, Camilla panicked, grabbed the paper tight, and shoved it under an official event program. Anne didn't say a word that night, but she logged every single detail in her head. So when Charles later called William in to deal with Camilla's formal demand, Anne decided it was time to drop the hammer. With William heading to the palace and Anne ready to spill the beans, Camilla's request was about to set off a total nuclear showdown. And nobody could back out now. The doors were locked, staff were kicked out, and all that polite, fake royal courtesy completely went out the window. Charles was standing opposite Camilla with the unsigned request sitting between them. William walked in carrying years of unhealed grief, and Anne brought a secret she'd been holding on to for months. No polished PR statement or fake ceremonial smiles could soften what went down next. The king demanded the absolute truth, and Camilla realized right then that everyone in that room thought she had crossed a major unforgivable line. Charles called the meeting in a private drawing room, making it crystal clear that no staff were to step foot inside. This wasn't just a tense family chat anymore. It was a total reckoning over who actually owned history. William laid down the law with cold, hard clarity. The physical archive might be sitting in a palace, but Diana's private words belonged to her sons in every way that truly mattered. The king dropped Camilla's unsigned petition on the table and demanded to know how on earth she got her hands on the top-secret classification code. Camilla just looked away in dead silence. The room was suffocatingly quiet until Princess Anne reached into her bag, pulled out that leaked inventory envelope, and slapped it right next to Camilla's petition. In a detailed account she'd prepared for Charles, Anne explained that she'd personally caught Camilla hiding the paper months ago. Totally cornered, Camilla finally caved. She admitted she got the paper from a palace insider, though she refused to throw them under the bus by giving a name. She swore up and down that she didn't do it out of malice. It was pure self-preservation. She was terrified the archive contained stuff that could destroy the public reputation she'd spent decades trying to rebuild. And that was the last straw for William. His composure totally snapped. He told her straight to her face that trying to hijack his mother's words wasn't self-defense. It was a slimy attempt to control how Diana would be remembered. The future king made it dead clear. His mother had lost control of her own story once, and he was never ever going to let the palace strip it away from her again. Then Camilla drops another huge piece of news. A warning she'd gotten during a secret chat with a senior advisor. They'd told her that the locked cassette was set to potentially go straight to William on a major family anniversary. She was terrified that whatever was on it would trigger a massive wave of public backlash, trash Charles's reputation, and turn his whole time on the throne into one endless, messy trial about the past. Charles just stared at her, completely blown away. Camilla admitted she'd known about this timeline for months, and had been quietly hunting for legal backdoors to snatch control of the archive before William could get his hands on it. Right then, the king realized this wasn't some spur of the moment request. She'd been plotting this whole thing out. So Charles takes off his signet ring, the big official ring that stands for his royal authority, and slams it down on the table next to the unsigned papers. He told Camilla straight up that she'd turned a painful sacred family legacy into a dirty power struggle. William was expecting his dad to flat out reject the request right then and there. But instead, the king pointed out something nobody saw coming. Final legal control over this whole mess might not even belong to the crown. See, even though the fight laid all of Camilla's paranoia bare, the fate of Diana's archive was locked behind a crazy web of legal safety nets, set up long before Charles ever took the throne. Camilla had walked in thinking the king could just wave a magic wand and unlock the vault. But the legal custody of the archive was intentionally broken up into pieces. Not a single monarch, courtier, spouse, or archivist had the power to swipe it on their own. Years ago, Diana had made sure the most sensitive parts of her personal story were protected by overlapping legal rights. The person holding all the cards wasn't Camilla, and to Charles's absolute shock, it wasn't really Charles either. Right on cue, the palace's chief archive custodian walks into the room, holding the original restriction register tight against his chest. This register is basically the holy grail of official logbooks. It spells out exactly who can open restricted stuff, under what conditions, and for what reason. He tells the king that Diana's personal collection was legally split into 3 totally different buckets: official historical records, personal family stuff, and protected private testimony. And that split was huge, because every single bucket had a different set of rules and owners. Charles listened as the archivist explained that while the crown managed standard state records, Diana's private letters and tapes were under a completely separate legal deed, built explicitly to honor her wishes and protect her boys. The king might control the whole monarchy machine, but he couldn't just ride roughshod over a legal trust built around private grief. Opening the logbook with obvious nervousness, the archivist dropped another bomb. No reigning queen consort in history had ever been given total control over another royal's private testimony. To Camilla, those words were like a slap in the face. The system didn't just see her as the king's wife. It saw her as someone with a massive conflict of interest who couldn't be trusted with the archive's integrity. Charles absorbed the news with a real bitter sting of irony. Diana had built safeguards strong enough to tie his own hands as king, and that hit his pride hard. William just remarked quietly that his mom had probably called this exact kind of palace pressure years ago. The prince didn't raise his voice. His cool calm had way more weight than throwing a tantrum. Then the archivist revealed the ultimate trump card in the register. Prince William's written permission was legally required before anyone could touch the top-secret files. At the same time, Prince Harry held a shared right over anything addressed to both brothers. Neither the sitting king nor Camilla had the power to wipe those rights away. On top of that, Princess Anne was holding another key safeguard. Diana had given Anne official authority to block any attempt to move the records if it looked like a cover-up, to protect people's reputations rather than preserve real history. She trusted Anne's directness because the Princess Royal never let palace comfort get in the way of the cold, hard truth. Charles turns to his eldest son and asks him straight up if he'd authorize Camilla's request. The future king looks at his dad, grabs the formal paper, and writes one single word across it: denied. Now, you'd think that refusal would have wrapped the whole drama up, right? But suddenly, the archivist totally freezes while inspecting the physical storage container. One of the master security seals on the archive box had been tampered with. Even though Camilla had just been officially shut out, the broken seal meant someone had already snuck into the vault unauthorized. The threat had just leveled up inside the high-security storage room. A numbered tamper. Evident seal had been peeled back and stuck right back on. So at first glance, nothing actually looked missing. But that tiny tampered seal completely flipped the script, turning a mess of a family drama into a full-blown royal security crisis. Charles was panicked, thinking he had a traitor right inside his inner circle. William was terrified. His mom's most intimate audio tapes had been secretly copied, and Camilla realized, to her horror, that all her behind the scenes snooping might have accidentally given the real intruder the perfect cover. The palace didn't waste a second. They put the entire archive wing on immediate, hard lockdown. Doors were sealed shut, and security seized everything. Digital logs, key cards, physical keys, even the staff's personal phones, sending them straight to forensics. Charles immediately stripped security access from everyone associated with that sector, and suspended the palace staffer who'd leaked the partial inventory to Camilla, even though the guy swore up and down during his recorded interrogation that he'd never actually stepped foot inside the vault. Meanwhile, Camilla retreated to her private sitting room, completely consumed by anxiety. She dismissed her staff, sat down alone, and actually took a framed photo of herself and Charles off her desk. She couldn't even bring herself to look at it. The queen consort felt totally cut off from her husband, but she had to face a brutal reality. Her desperate move to snatch the archive made her look completely guilty of a break, and she swore she never ordered. Before the initial security audit was even wrapped up, William confronted Charles face to face. The prince told his dad straight up that all trust in the institution was totally broken, because an intruder had gotten into the one place built to protect his mom's final legacy. Charles got defensive and angrily rejected the idea that he'd failed to protect Diana's memory. But William just looked at him and dropped 4 words that instantly froze the room. Then protect her now. And just like that, the king's anger completely melted away. He knew the archive wasn't just paper, it was a sacred duty. Diana wasn't here to defend herself anymore, and William had spent his entire life watching his mother's trauma get turned into public entertainment. Charles also knew that with every passing hour, the odds of stolen tapes or letters leaking to the press were skyrocketing. Then the forensic team got a major break in the security logs. Someone had accessed the archive corridor late one night using a digital entry code linked directly to Camilla's private office. At first, it looked like a slam dunk against her, but a deeper tech audit revealed a wild twist. The code had been cloned and run from an outside terminal. Somebody had deliberately staged the break, in using Camilla's login so she'd take the fall if they got caught. Realizing this was a calculated setup, Charles moved fast and hard. He officially blocked Camilla's office from ever accessing historical records again, and ordered the entire collection transferred immediately to a top-secret facility. Under the direct joint guard of Prince William and Princess Anne, it completely iced out his wife. But the king refused to back down. As the moving trucks started packing up the archive, Camilla asked for a private, one sit-down with William. No Charles, no lawyers, no palace handlers. For the very first time, Camilla had to face the heir to the throne, not as a queen speaking to a prince, but as one flawed human being to the son of the woman whose shadow had ruled both their lives. There were no aides, no official binders, no royal mediation. Camilla stood in front of William completely stripped of the heavy armor of her title. And look, William had every reason in the world to tell her to take a hike, but he wanted answers. He needed to know why she'd risk her marriage, her reputation, and the whole stability of the monarchy just to get her hands on Diana's words. And that conversation ended up changing the entire course of the crisis. William set one absolute, non-negotiable rule before they even sat down. Nothing Camilla said would ever give her control over that archive. He drew that line in the sand right away, reminding her that the collection belonged emotionally and legally to Diana's boys, and the palace machinery was never touching it again. Camilla didn't fight him on it. She accepted his boundary right off the bat, admitting that this stuff belonged to William and Harry in a way no royal title or status could ever touch. Then, she finally blurted out the raw truth she'd kept hidden from Charles and the archivists. She was absolutely terrified that Diana's unreleased tapes would shrink her entire life's legacy down to one single label. The woman who broke up a marriage and became the villain of royal history forever. William listened, but he didn't give an inch. He told her straight up that his mother's voice wasn't some corporate threat to be managed or swept under the rug. It was the real human voice of someone who'd been stripped of her own story. He pointed out that Diana spent years watching other people speak for her, and he wasn't about to let that keep happening after she was gone. That was the moment Camilla's defenses completely fell apart. She admitted the constant unknown was driving her crazy. She desperately needed to know what Diana had put on those tapes before the words reached Charles, William, or the global media. Her goal, she swore, wasn't to trash the late princess, but to brace herself for a public hit she couldn't predict or defend against. Then came the real bomb. She named the senior advisor who'd been feeding her paranoia. This guy was the one who tipped her off about the tape in the first place, pushed her to use her royal status to pull rank on the whole archive, and told her to move fast before the stuff got transferred to William. Camilla handed over every single private message and email between them. William saw the bigger picture right away. The advisor had cloned Camilla's login, pulled off the physical break in, and set it up so the queen consort would take all the heat, by driving a massive wedge between the king, the queen, and the heir. This guy was playing a dangerous game to get his hands on black market dirt he could use to blackmail the whole institution. Camilla signed a formal legal paper permanently giving up any right to ever touch the archive again, and slid it across the table. She knew those leaked messages would probably wreck her standing in the family for good, but she stopped making excuses. As William stood up to leave, she didn't beg for forgiveness. She just looked at him and said, "Your mother's words should stay hers." Getting rid of that rogue advisor plugged the security hole inside the palace. But it was too late. News of Camilla's move on the archive had already leaked outside the palace walls. And just like that, the private feud exploded into a massive public crisis. Outside the gates, Diana's name was once again turned into a battle cry for truth, personal boundaries, and the limits of royal power. By the next morning, the story was leading international news, plastering front pages and triggering heated debates all across Britain. Interestingly, the most powerful statement didn't come from a polished palace spokesperson. It came from a spontaneous crowd outside Kensington Palace, where everyday people started leaving handwritten notes and flowers at Diana's gates. Messages saying that even a princess has the absolute right to own her private truth. Even after death, the palace scrambled to contain the damage. They put out an official statement confirming that Queen Camilla had asked about access to Diana's protected personal items, but emphasized that the request was turned down and officially pulled back. While the statement forced the royal family to air their dirty laundry in public, admitting the sitting queen tried to grab her predecessor's records, it strategically left out the whole nightmare about the security break. The media went wild with it, framing the whole thing as a clash between royal authority and basic human rights. One major broadcast called it the ultimate test of whether the crown could just rewrite history, simply because the truth made the people in power feel uncomfortable. The public debate got hotter by the minute. A major national paper printed a massive front-page photo of a sealed archive box with the headline, "Her words, her sons, her legacy." Copies completely sold out across the country before noon. Outside Kensington Palace, a young mom left 2 white roses next to a card that read, "A woman's private truth is not the crown's property." That single image was broadcast on almost every evening news channel in the country. Through all this chaos, William came out looking like the rock of the whole situation. He won huge respect from the public for fiercely defending his mom's legacy, while keeping his cool when dealing with Camilla. He put a hard stop to her overreach, but still treated her evidence fairly to catch the real insider who betrayed them, showing major strength without turning it into a petty revenge match. Camilla sat completely alone, watching the media storm unfold, in her desperate attempt to avoid getting compared to Diana yet again. Her own actions had backfired spectacularly, triggering the exact public nightmare she was terrified of in the first place. Every single headline was a brutal reminder that letting panic drive her decisions had pushed her right into the worst case scenario. Shortly after, the palace put out a detailed security report confirming that the senior advisor who duplicated her login code was fired on the spot and handed over to the police for a formal investigation. The audit cleared Camilla of ordering the actual break-in. But let's be real. It did zero to wash away the fact that she tried to pull rank on the archive in the first place. To make sure a mess like this could never ever happen again, King Charles signed a legally binding archive charter. This set down a strict rule for the monarchy. Private personal testimonies stored in royal vaults can never be transferred, edited, or buried just to protect palace reputations. The king made it crystal clear that no living royal can hijack another person's private words just to boost their own public image. Later on, William made a private visit to the archive in its new, high-security home. He stood right in front of the sealed box, holding his mom's audio tape, placed his hand on the container, but chose not to open it. He decided that keeping her legacy safe and untouched meant way more than satisfying any personal curiosity. So while the public had already made up its mind, it was up to Charles to figure out if this whole disaster was going to tear his family apart forever, or if they could find a way forward. Charles started this crisis as a totally stunned husband confronted with a crazy demand. He ended it as a king, forced to draw a hard line between standing by his wife and protecting the memory of his ex-wife for his sons. His actions couldn't erase the deep, historical pain between Diana and Camilla. But he set a massive precedent. The crown can preserve history. But it has zero right to snatch a person's private truth, just because that truth is uncomfortable. The king did one final review of the security report, Camilla's signed withdrawal, and the new archive charter before sitting down with both of them separately. The investigation officially proved that while Camilla pushed to get her hands on the files, she didn't order the physical break-in. That disgraced advisor had weaponized her insecurity, copied her login, and broke into the vault for his own leverage and blackmail game. Charles told Camilla straight to her face that feeling scared was no excuse for stomping over boundaries. He got why Diana's voice intimidated her, but stressed that trying to take control of a dead woman's private words crossed a line no royal title could ever justify. He told her that being queen meant living alongside history, not trying to rewrite it whenever the past got too painful. Camilla accepted his verdict without a fight. She signed off on a permanent exclusion from anything related to Diana's archive and acknowledged the deep pain she'd caused William. She kept her spot as queen consort, but lost any say in Diana's legacy forever. Then Charles met privately with William. He handed over the signed official archive charter with the royal seal, giving his son an absolute sovereign promise that Diana's letters, journals, and recordings would stay protected exactly as she wanted, guarded by her children's rights. The future king took the document, but refused to rub it in his stepmother's face or treat it like a personal victory. William reaffirmed that the locked recording would stay unreleased to the public, off palace PR strategies, and far away from political games. It would sit untouched until both he and Harry mutually agreed that listening to it served their family, rather than feeding another media circus. His choice protected his mother's voice with pure restraint, not revenge. Right before the new vault was locked down for good, Charles visited the archive chamber completely alone. He stood silently before the collection, lowered his head in reflection, and walked out without asking to read a single page. William and Princess Anne were officially named the sole legal guardians of the restricted collection. While Queen Camilla was permanently cut out from managing Diana's history, the bottom line was undeniable. Royal rank can't buy you ownership over someone else's memories. Camilla kept her crown next to Charles, but lost the power she tried to grab. The king saved his marriage only by standing firm in defense of Diana's legacy, and Prince William protected his mom's voice through pure dignity, not payback. The folder was closed, the vault was locked, and Charles's verdict was final. Diana's private truth would never become palace property, nor belong to the woman who feared it most. Anyway, thanks for hanging out and listening. If you enjoyed this deep dive, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Catch you guys in the next one.